Your soulmate was caught crying about your age last night, they told their friend. Open immediately. My beloved child, don't rush past this moment, because what was hidden in silence last night has the power to change the way you see everything. There was a conversation that almost never happened. It wasn't planned. It wasn't rehearsed. It unfolded naturally when someone could no longer keep their emotions locked away. Imagine this for a second. A quiet evening, an ordinary conversation between close friends, and then, without warning, your soulmate's voice began to tremble. They weren't crying because of regret alone. They weren't crying because life had become difficult. Their tears came from a question they had carried for far too long, a question connected to your age, the timing of your lives, and the fear that destiny had written your stories on different pages. Stay with this thought, because every detail matters more than you realize. Their friend noticed the silence before the words. Sometimes silence reveals more than any confession ever could. Finally, your soulmate whispered something they had never dared to say aloud. What if our age is the reason everything feels delayed? What if time keeps placing invisible walls between us? Those words didn't come from weakness. They came from a heart that had been searching for answers while pretending everything was fine. Now pause for a moment. Have you ever wondered why certain people suddenly become distant, only to return with even deeper feelings? Have you questioned why strange coincidences keep appearing whenever you think your connection has faded? What if those moments were never accidents? What if someone has been quietly trying to understand a future they desperately hope still includes you? Last night became different because their friend didn't laugh. They didn't dismiss the concern. Instead, they listened, carefully. And sometimes, being truly heard unlocks emotions that have been trapped for years. Your soulmate admitted that every passing day made them think about possibilities rather than limitations. They weren't counting numbers. They were measuring moments they feared might slip away forever. But here is where the story takes an unexpected turn. The friend asked a simple question that changed the entire atmosphere. If age disappeared from the conversation, what would your heart choose? There was no immediate answer. Only tears. Because sometimes the truth arrives before words do. Those tears were not about giving up. They were about finally accepting something impossible to ignore. Deep inside, your soulmate realized they had been allowing fear to speak louder than hope. They had imagined conversations that never happened. They had assumed conclusions before allowing destiny to reveal its next chapter. Think carefully. How many beautiful stories have been delayed because someone believed timing was against them? How many opportunities disappeared simply because fear convinced people they already knew the ending? Perhaps this message has found you today because your own perspective is being quietly challenged. Not everything that appears impossible is permanent. Not every delay is a denial. Sometimes life stretches the distance only to strengthen the connection that survives it. And this is why you shouldn't leave just yet. The most important part isn't what your soulmate cried about. The real mystery is what happened immediately after those tears stopped. Their friend leaned forward and shared a thought so unexpected, so deeply personal, that your soulmate completely froze. It wasn't advice. It wasn't comfort. It was an observation that connected recent events, hidden signs, and a possibility neither of them had considered before. For the first time in a very long while, hope became louder than fear. That single realization started changing everything from that very moment. And what they discovered next may completely transform the meaning behind everything you've experienced recently. So stay close. Because the next chapter begins exactly where this unforgettable conversation ends. Hold on for just a little longer, because what unfolded after that conversation was something neither your soulmate nor their friend expected. The room had become completely still. It wasn't an uncomfortable silence, it was the kind of silence that appears when a truth is finally ready to reveal itself. Your soulmate slowly wiped away the tears, took a deep breath, and looked toward the window as though searching for an answer beyond the night itself. Then their friend quietly said, "I've been watching you for months, and I don't think your fear has anything to do with age anymore." Those words landed with surprising weight. Your soulmate looked confused. "What do you mean?" The reply came gently. "I've seen the way your face changes whenever you mention them. I've noticed how you hesitate before reaching out. You keep telling yourself that time has created distance, but every decision you've made has been driven by the fear of what might happen, not by what has actually happened." That sentence changed everything. Sometimes the hardest truth isn't hidden in the future. Sometimes it's hidden inside the stories we tell ourselves. Pause here for a moment. How many times have people walked away from beautiful possibilities because they believed they already knew the outcome? How often has uncertainty disguised itself as certainty? Your soulmate became completely quiet. Not because they disagreed. Because, deep inside, they knew their friend was right. For months they had replayed imaginary conversations. Wondering whether your age would become a barrier, whether life would somehow make the connection impossible, whether circumstances would speak louder than genuine understanding. Yet none of those fears had ever been confirmed. They had simply grown stronger inside silence. The friend smiled softly before asking one final question. "If tomorrow you discovered that none of those fears were real, what would you do first?" Without thinking, your soulmate answered, "I would stop waiting." The words escaped naturally. Almost instinctively. As though their heart had been waiting for permission to speak all along. In that single moment, something shifted. Not outside. Inside. The weight they had carried for so long suddenly became lighter. They realized they had spent more energy protecting themselves from imagined disappointment than allowing themselves to experience genuine hope. Now here's something remarkable. Their friend reached into a pocket and pulled out a small folded note. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't magical. It simply contained a sentence they had written months earlier after observing your soulmate's journey. It read, "The right connection isn't measured by the calendar. It's measured by the courage to stop letting fear make your decisions." Your soulmate stared at those words for what felt like forever. Sometimes a single sentence arrives at exactly the right moment. Not because it predicts the future, but because it reminds us who we've always been. If this message has resonated with you so far, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you're enjoying this journey together, consider sharing it with someone who needs encouragement and subscribing so you don't miss the next chapter of this unfolding story. As the night drew closer to its end, your soulmate quietly whispered something almost impossible to hear. "I don't want another day to pass wondering what could have been." Their friend nodded, but instead of answering, they revealed one final observation about you, something they had noticed long before anyone else. The moment those words were spoken, your soulmate's expression completely changed. What they heard next wasn't just unexpected. It became the beginning of a decision that neither of them saw coming. And that decision is where this story takes its most unforgettable turn. Before you scroll any further, listen to this carefully, because the next few moments reveal the reason that conversation has stayed in your soulmate's heart ever since. After hearing their friend's final observation, they didn't respond immediately. Instead, they looked down, smiled through lingering tears, and whispered something so honest that it caught even their closest friend by surprise. "I've been afraid that they'll see the difference between us before they ever see my heart." The room fell silent again. Not because there was nothing left to say, but because every word now carried undeniable truth. Their friend leaned forward and gently replied, "Do you know what I've noticed? Every time you speak about them, you never describe their age. You describe their kindness, their strength, the peace you feel when you imagine them. Doesn't that tell you what truly matters?" That question lingered in the air. Your soulmate closed their eyes for a brief moment, almost as if replaying every memory they had carefully protected. Suddenly, they realized something extraordinary. All this time they had been worried about a number, while their heart had been focused on something completely different. The connection they treasured had never been built on years. It had been built on understanding, respect, laughter, and a feeling that words could never fully explain. Think about that. How often do people allow one uncertainty to become so loud that it drowns out everything beautiful standing right in front of them? Perhaps you've experienced something similar. Maybe you've questioned whether circumstances, timing, or outside opinions could rewrite a connection that feels deeply meaningful. But what if those doubts were never meant to decide the ending? What if they were only temporary clouds passing across a much brighter sky? As the clock moved closer to midnight, their friend shared one final piece of wisdom. "You know why you're emotional tonight? Because your future is asking you to stop living inside imagined limits. Real connections aren't tested by perfect situations. They're revealed when two hearts choose honesty over hesitation." Those words settled deeply. For the first time in a long while, your soulmate didn't argue with their own thoughts. They didn't search for another reason to delay hope. They simply breathed, slowly, peacefully, as though an invisible weight had finally lifted from their shoulders. Then something unexpected happened. Their phone lit up. It wasn't a dramatic message. It wasn't a shocking announcement. It was simply a small reminder from an ordinary day, yet it carried extraordinary meaning. Looking at it, your soulmate smiled in a way their friend had not seen for months. "Maybe," they quietly said, "I've been waiting for the perfect sign, when all I really needed was the courage to believe that some connections deserve a chance." Their friend smiled back. "Exactly. And remember this, no meaningful story is written by fear alone." Those words became the turning point of the entire night. From that moment forward, your soulmate made a quiet promise to themselves. No more letting assumptions speak louder than sincerity. No more allowing invisible barriers to overshadow genuine feelings. No more measuring possibilities by uncertainty instead of hope. Because sometimes the greatest transformation doesn't begin with a grand event. It begins with one honest conversation. One unexpected realization. And one decision to stop letting fear write tomorrow's story. But the journey isn't over yet. Because by the very next morning, something completely unplanned happened, something that made your soulmate believe this conversation wasn't a coincidence at all. And when you hear what unfolded next, you'll understand why this unforgettable night became the beginning of an entirely new chapter. Wait. Don't let this chapter pass by, because the morning after that emotional conversation carried a feeling neither your soulmate nor their friend could explain. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, yet impossible to ignore. Sometimes the biggest changes don't arrive with noise. They arrive with clarity. Your soulmate woke earlier than usual. For the first time in what felt like forever, they didn't reach for their fears. They reached for hope. They remembered every word from the night before. Every pause. Every tear. Every sentence that had slowly replaced doubt with courage. Standing by the window, they whispered to themselves, "Maybe I've been looking at this story from the wrong angle." That simple thought became the beginning of everything. As the day unfolded, little moments began connecting in unexpected ways. A familiar song played in a place they hadn't heard it before. A conversation between strangers echoed advice almost identical to what their friend had shared. Even the smallest details seemed to gently remind them that life often moves forward the moment we stop resisting it. Was it coincidence? Perhaps. Or perhaps it was simply what happens when a heart finally becomes open enough to notice the opportunities that were always there. Think about your own journey for a second. How many beautiful moments have quietly appeared while your attention was focused only on your worries? Sometimes we don't need life to change. Sometimes we only need our perspective to change. That realization stayed with your soulmate all day. By the afternoon, they found themselves smiling without forcing it. Their friend noticed immediately and laughed softly. There it is. What? The version of you that stopped arguing with possibilities. Your soulmate smiled back. I think I finally understand something. What's that? I was asking whether age could define our future, when I should have been asking whether honesty could. Their friend nodded with complete confidence. Honesty always has a stronger voice. Those words settled deep inside. From that moment on, your soulmate made another quiet promise. No more assuming someone else's thoughts. No more creating endings before the story has a chance to unfold. Only truth. Only authenticity. Only the courage to move one step at a time. And maybe that's why this message has reached you today. Not to convince you that the future is already written, but to remind you that hope grows strongest when fear finally steps aside. If this story has touched something inside you, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. And if these messages continue to encourage your heart, subscribing is simply a way to stay connected for the next chapter of this journey together. But before this day ended, Something happened that neither your soulmate nor their friend expected. A single conversation. One completely unexpected encounter. And one sentence spoken by someone who knew nothing about the night before. It instantly confirmed the lesson they had just learned. The moment those words were heard, your soulmate looked up with quiet confidence and whispered, "Maybe this really is the beginning." And what happened after that became the moment they would remember for a very long time. One final moment remains, and it may be the quietest yet the most meaningful part of this entire journey. By the time evening arrived, your soulmate no longer looked like the person who had been overwhelmed with uncertainty the night before. The questions hadn't completely disappeared, but they no longer controlled the direction of their heart. As they walked home, something unexpected happened. An elderly stranger, smiling warmly without any obvious reason, simply said, "Never let the right people become strangers because you were afraid of the wrong questions." The words lasted only a few seconds. But they stayed in your soulmate's mind for hours. They turned around, hoping to thank the stranger again. The person had already disappeared into the crowd. Their friend, who had witnessed the moment from a distance, walked over with a smile. "Funny, isn't it?" "What is?" "Life has a way of repeating the lesson until we're finally ready to hear it." Your soulmate laughed softly. "I think I'm finally listening." For the first time in a long while, they stopped asking whether circumstances were perfect. Instead, they asked something much more important. Am I becoming the person who has the courage to be honest? That question changed everything. Because courage isn't about knowing every answer. It's about taking one sincere step without letting fear decide where the journey ends. As the sun slowly disappeared beyond the horizon, your soulmate found a quiet place to sit alone. They closed their eyes and reflected on every moment of the past 24 hours. The tears, the conversation, the encouragement, the unexpected stranger, and the realization that had been growing stronger with every passing hour. Then, almost like writing a letter they never intended anyone else to read, they whispered, "If our paths are truly meant to cross, I don't want fear to arrive before I do. I want kindness to arrive first. I want honesty to arrive first. I want hope to arrive first." Those weren't dramatic words. They were peaceful ones. And sometimes peace is the strongest sign that someone has stopped fighting against their own heart. Their friend later asked one simple question. "So, if you had one message for them today, what would it be?" Your soulmate didn't hesitate. "I'd tell them not to worry about the things that make people different. I'd tell them that genuine respect, understanding, and shared purpose are worth far more than the fears we imagine. I'd tell them that some connections deserve patience. And that every meaningful story begins with one honest conversation." A gentle breeze passed by. The silence that followed no longer felt empty. It felt complete. And perhaps that is the true meaning behind everything you've heard today. Not that every story unfolds in exactly the same way. Not that every path is identical. But that fear loses its influence the moment truth is welcomed with an open heart. If this message found you at the right time, carry one thought with you as you leave. Never let assumptions become louder than understanding. Never let hesitation become stronger than authenticity. And never underestimate what can change when someone chooses courage over doubt. Because the conversation that began with tears ended with hope. And sometimes, hope is the very first page of an entirely new beginning. This chapter ends here. But every meaningful journey continues with the choices we make after the story is over. Take one last quiet pause, because this isn't where the story fades away. It's where everything finally begins to make sense. Days passed after that unforgettable night. Your soulmate noticed something they had never paid attention to before. The fear that had once occupied every quiet moment was no longer the first voice they heard each morning. Instead, a new thought had taken its place. What if this journey has been preparing me, not delaying me? That single question changed the way they looked at every memory. Suddenly, the age they had once worried about seemed much smaller than the kindness they remembered, the conversations they cherished, the peace they felt whenever your presence crossed their mind. Their friend smiled when they noticed the difference. "You've changed." Your soulmate laughed softly. "No. I think I've finally stopped fighting myself." There was no dramatic celebration. No extraordinary event. Just a calm confidence that couldn't be shaken by the doubts that once felt so powerful. Then came one final really